Hello everyone, welcome back to our Spring Boot series. Today I would like to talk about the introduction of the use of interfaces in our classes, and of course it will have implications in our beans, mainly if you have multiple beans that implement the same interface, how Spring Boot can decide which one should use, or maybe there will be issues around it, and what are the best strategies to resolve them. So let's see into more detail. So the main goals of this presentation and practice exercise, it's how interfaces are used in Spring Boot, how they affect bean resolution, ambiguities that will arise from this, and conflicts, and I'll provide some real examples, even showing some code being executed. So why use interfaces? It's always a good practice when we are developing. First is the abstraction, because it decouples the implementation from usage, and if it's decoupled, we can, for instance, replace one instance with another one for testing or other kinds of purposes. So reusability across components, easier testing with mocks and subs. Again, we can replace a real class with a mock one, so we can test our application without using the real database or real external system or a real file system and so on. And we can have multiple implementations for the same thing. For instance, sometimes you want to send notification using email, SMS, or even push notifications. And of course, the method, it's the same name, and want to plug in different implementations. So interface, it's always a good abstraction. So let's see a simple example. So we imagine that we have a notification service that we want to implement, and we intend to implement multiple notification services with multiple targets like email, SMS, and things like that. So let's consider that we are only sending the message. Of course, a real implementation will need other parameters like the destination, froms, subjects, and so on. But for educational purpose, let's say that we only need the message. So we create our bean like this service, and the annotation should always be on the class, because it's the class that will be instantiated by the Spring Boot. Let's say we have an email notification service that implements this notification service. So when we declare a variable of this notification service to be injected, Spring Boot will be clever enough to understand that the email notification is a notification server. So it will take this instance and will inject in the place of the variable that is using this interface. So again, Spring scans and finds the service class registered as a notification service bean. When it says you registered, it's the data type, because the name of the bean, okay, will be email notification service, where the E, it's lowercase. This is how Spring Boot gives names to beans. You can override that behavior with parameters here, which will be the subject of a future video, but for now, if you don't provide the name will always be the name of the class with the first letter in lowercase. So, but here it is talking about the type, and it's important for the Spring Boot to understand the type, because if you are using an interface, a set of different classes can have the same type because they implement the same interface. So in this case, you have a notification service, and of course, since we only have one service or one bean that implements a notification service, the email will be injected in this variable. It will replace this notification service here. So what is the problem is when we have multiple implementations. Imagine that we had a new one. Now, additional to email, we have SMS. So there will be an ambiguity, which is a problem because Spring finds two beans of type notification server, so it doesn't know which one should it choose to put it here. So there will be auto-wiring conflict, and the error will be something like no qualifying bean of type notification. There will be a lot of message that you will see on the output, but this one is one of them. But you will see clearly when you start the application that you have a lot of strange message that they are not usual when you start your application. Another thing that can happen, and I had it, is called an edge case, which is circular dependencies. So we have a class A that implements the interface A, let's say, and the class B that implements the interface B. The problem is here on the injection, we are using an interface, which is the B service on the A, but we need an instance of B. But here on the B, we need an instance of A. And this can happen when you start to use interfaces. Even without interface, you can have this issue. Inject the B here rather on the A. But sometimes interface, it happens more because you have multiple implementations, and we don't really at first sight understand what they are creating, a kind of a circular thing. And in those cases, Spring Boot will throw in a circular dependency exception that can be resolved with, for instance, with a notation called lazy. It's not resolving the circular, but lazy means that it will only instantiate the bin or inject the dependency when it is really necessary. And sometimes during the execution, maybe it will not be necessary even during the whole execution. But I will create a specific video to talk about these annotations that you can put on the bins. The lazy one is one that is quite important. It is used, small alert, for instance, to make your start faster. Sometimes your application needs to connect to external systems, and if you have to wait for all of them, and I was in a bank application where we had this issue, and sometimes the application took 10 to 15 minutes just to start, because it depends on message queues and connecting to other systems, and is waiting synchronously for that systems. So the bin the constructor of the bin took a lot of time to start. And lazy, it's a good solution, because lazy says, okay, in the start, just don't care. Only when you need a specific bin and you want to inject this one there, so in that case you try to connect to the system. So strategies to avoid ambiguity. One, it's the optional injection, meaning that in the auto wire, if you put required false, it means, okay, if there is a bin available, great. If it's not, just put null there. And avoids errors if the bin isn't present. But of course, in that case, you have to handle in your code the possibility of the bin to not be there. And this can happen sometimes when, for instance, you use field injection. In the constructor, sometimes it's a little bit different, but it works also. But in field injection, sometimes happens. It was not possible to create the bin or inject the bin. And or maybe you are just creating these bins using a configuration class and you are returning a null. So the bin wasn't created. But what you are saying is, I don't care if it's not created. I have an alternative approach. So in that case, you can always... But you can always check, and you should check if that instance is null or not. And if it's not null, you can use it. It was initialized. If it's not initialized, you should have a fallback behavior, of course. But I will create specific videos for these strategies. But I will talk all about all of them here, so you understand what strategies can you use to avoid ambiguity. So the solution one is qualifier. Qualifier is when you specify the name of the bin that should be injected, meaning that this will create an ambiguity because we have email and the SMS. But here with the qualifier, we are saying, okay, use this bin, this instance. So there will not be ambiguity here because he understands, okay, I will try to find this bin. In my context, I will inject it here. You can use that field injection. In constructor injection, just put this before the data type, and it will also works. Okay. Solution 2, it's the primary. It's quite good if you have already code and you are adding a new bin that can create the ambiguity. Imagine that our application always uses the email, and in a recent release you want to introduce the SMS. So the code was not created to use qualifiers because there was no need for qualifiers because there was only one implementation. If you are adding a second one strategy is to put this primary on the email, which is the one which is the default one. And now when there is some ambiguity and you don't have the qualifier, the primary, it's already saying it will be the default one. So Spring, when it detects ambiguity, it will try to find the primary one. And if it finds, it will inject this one. It's quite nice, this kind of primary introduction, because it allows you to create a default mechanism in Spring Boot for your bins. And then the other ones that will be added, you should use the qualifier to explicitly say, okay, in this particular thing, I'm adding a SMS, I will use the qualifier for the SMS to be used in this new code. Okay. Solution 3, use configuration class. In this case, you are controlling the creation of the bin. So you are returning here the interface, but inside you can return any implementation of this interface. So there will be no ambiguity because you only have one way to create. It will be here that we will decide which one should be provided. It will not work for all the cases, but it's a strategy that you can have in your pocket to resolve something that the primary and qualifier were not be able to resolve. Another one is inject a list or map. It's a different strategy, and in some cases it's quite useful, because if you provide something like this, use list notification service, it will look for all the implementations of the notification servers and will be created in this list, which is quite nice. So you'll never have an ambiguity in this class. because if you have 3 implementations of notification server, you will have 3 rows on this list. And the same, or you can use a map. In this map, you have a bonus, which will be the name of the bin and the instance here. It's the same as the list, but you have this an additional bonus. So you have here the name of the bin. Sometimes it's useful. Imagine that you want to send a message, broadcast a message to all channels, to an email, SMS, push notification, like that. So just create a list or a map. Your list is when you don't care about which one, so it should go through all of them. The map, maybe you need 1 or 2 in some cases, and you don't want to provide multiple injections on the constructor. You just want to put a map and say, I need all of them. I will then do the get on the map and inject. Okay, that's one way to do. But be careful if the code changes and some of the bins stop to exist. At the compilation time, you'll not detect this because they are just string the name of the bins here. So there is some hidden functionality here that can break your code. So be careful with that. Bin injection logic, again, so Spring context where the bins exist after created. So these two, but at the end of the day, the Spring context understand these 2 bins, but the data type, it's only one, which is the notification service. And the data type, it is what is used by default to do the injection, unless you provide the names, the strategies to the Ambiguity, and that's when, let's say, a second level from Spring Boot will try to use the names that he has given to the bins. Let's say some use cases. So testing with mocks, that's one advantage is to use this one. Of course, under test configuration, something that I should talk in future videos when I start the test subject in Spring Boot. But one advantage is, again, you have the notification services interface, but here we are providing a mock. Okay. Runtime bin selection, like this one. Again, the list that we talked about a few moments ago. Now you can send all the message, I notify all, just for each, you don't care, just call the method. And every instance of every bin that implements this one will be called by this send. Okay, so interface that already exist in Spring Boot, there are others. These ones are probably the most common that we use. Data source, I already provide some videos about the data source every time we access the database or using JDBC template and things like that. So data source, it's an interface, command line runner, application runner, something that we'll use for sure in future videos. It's quite nice. It allows us to receive parameters, for instance, from the application and in several different bins, and you can, every time the application starts, want to execute code in multiple bins, command line runner, application runner, they fit quite nice in those scenarios. And it's very good to perform some testing before doing real implementations. Environments, it's another interface that is provided by Spring Boot, but it is usually instantiated. There is a bin already provided, but we can provide our own bin, provide a different implementation for the environment and be used in bin in our application. So some takeaways from this slide. So interface promote coupling testing. It's always a good practice. Try to use it as much as you can. Spring can't guess between multiple bins. That's why you need one of those strategies that I talk about. Use qualifier first. Usually, if you are using legacy code or you are not designing from ground, you already have code and a bin that was always used, you are introducing a new one that creates ambiguity. So use the primary, or you can also use config methods, and inject list or map when multiple implementations are expected, and interface simplify mocking and runtime flexibility. Okay, so thanks for watching these slides. Now, in a moment, I will provide you examples in practice using our application that I'm developing in our EDA. So let's go to it. Okay, it's this application that I'm using along the videos. The code, by the way, it's already provided. There was one person, thanks for asking, that asked me to put the code in GitHub. It's in GitHub. I create a post, I think in the posts of the channel, there is the link to the GitHub. Please check it. Usually every time I will create, every time a new commit, or at least there will be commits called part 25, 26, 27 with the same name usually as the video, so it should be easy for you looking into the commits, which version do you want to check out. Okay. So by the way, this video should be the 26, I think, if my mind is not tricking me. So the code will be under the commit, at least part 26, and probably in front there will be something called bins ambiguity or something very similar. So let's see, we have this user service, and I created here under the package service one called message. And the message, I create a message service, which contains a method called send message, just a regular interface with the send message that receives a message and the set of parameters. It's always a good practice to have parameters in a map, because when we want to send an email, we need the from, CC, to, subject, and things like that. But for instance, for SMS, we just need a number in the message, things like that. So the map provides us this dynamic behavior. So we have the send message, this is the message, and again, the parameters. Now we have the email service. It's a service here that implements the message service, okay, and sends the message, just a system out saying sending email. The rest, it's not quite important, unless the only thing that matters is we have this to and subject that should be provided when we call this email. And we have the notification here that will see sending notification, not email, and only needs the to with some message. It is not important, just for us to distinguish between notification and email. So, and what happens is every time we create a user, we will send an email. So we need to inject email service here. And that will be a problem, because you have this message service. And there are two implementations for the message service, which is the notification and email. So let's see what happens when we start. We expect an error, or maybe I have a surprise for you. So there is no error, which is quite strange, because, okay, but we have two bins. How Spring understands which one to inject here? Strangely, Spring looks into this name of the parameter, and this is quite even more strange, because usually Java doesn't, when it compiles, it doesn't keep the name of the parameters of the methods, but there is a way to do it. And sometimes the IDEs, like IntelliJ, they do this kind of thing. So if you go here, and I will show you differently. I will just remove this name from here, like this, so you understand what I'm saying. I'll just do a save. And even IntelliJ already says that could not auto-wire, there is more than one bin. I just renamed the parameter. I didn't put nothing more than that. But if I stop and start, we should see an error here. Unless I have to remove something here, let's say, because of a cache. Yeah, okay, but you can see here that, okay, now it's the error that we expect. Something like, okay, you require one bin, but I found two, the email and notification. But the only thing that I did was to change this. Okay, again, if I put here the service, it will work like this. So why is this working? It's because of this here. Settings, compiler, this option here. There is these parameters that you can pass at compilation that keeps the parameters, the name of the parameters after the compilation. And Spring Boot, after version 5, he understands this concept and use it. I don't think it's a good idea, because it hides what's really happening, and the solution is hidden in a parameter at compilation time, and unless it is well documented, someone for sure will forget it. So if I remove this, like this, and do OK, now I'll just remove this target to make sure that we don't have any cache class compiled. And now if I start the application, now it's the email service like before that it was working. Oops, okay, but my fault here. All these renamings and things, so I'll put service here. Let's start. Oh, I don't know if I did the apply. Sometimes it's necessary. Okay, but now it's not working because I removed that parameter. So this is working as expected from the start. Okay, so one way to resolve this, let's see one of the strategies. I will not touch all of them, but I will at least, I already touched one with using parameters. It's not a good strategy, but it works. Now let's use another one, which is using this primary here. So what I'm telling Spring Boot is, okay, this is the default class. In case of ambiguity, please use this one. So let's start with the primary here. and okay, it compiles, he understands how to inject. So we have here the email. So there's a user to be created. So let's create a user using a postman here. So you have here, I will change to post. So you have a post, finance users. If you are following my videos, you already know that you have this REST controller. And we have a post here for users that receives the body, the user, and calls the create user for our service and returns the user. And returns the user because the database will generate an ID, and that's why we return the user. So we are sending a user with ID null, and we should return an ID 8. So let's execute, and it was generated 8. And you can see that was executed and the bin was called the injected one, because you can see here the sending email. Okay, that's one way to do it. Imagine now that you want to also use the notification service, or maybe let's try a different approach before going to that. So I will comment this one. So we have ambiguity again. How can we avoid ambiguity? A different way is to use here the qualifier. And here you can use the email service because it's the name of the bin. And that's why it was working with the parameters, because this name was the same as this name here. So I think I can stop and run. I don't know why DevTools is not working, because I configured. Maybe it was some update that I did on the IntelliJ. Okay, I have this completed. It seems to be working, but let's try again to create a user, send, and you can see here again the send email. So it's not using the primary, but it's using this qualifier. And now let's add this notification so we can update and see both injections. Again, we have here this message. Here we need to inject a different one. Qualifier. And not notification service. I will uncomment this. I prepared this so you don't have to see me writing everything. And you don't have to wait. So, and this is the code that does the same thing, but it's using notification service, not email service. And every time a user is updated, it will provide a notification service saying, hello, your account has been updated, and this and the required tool that we have here on the notification, like here, this one. Okay, so let's see. I think I have to restart. Okay, let's put the application up. Okay, it's injecting both. Remember that we're injecting the mail service and notification service. Again, if I remove this, there will be an issue because it doesn't understand if I own two email services or not. One way that I'm not putting here, but you can try yourself in the code, just replace these messages with a list or a map. And here, of course, here you cannot do something like this. You have to get the name of the bin first and then call the send message. But at the end of the day, all of them will be message service. So the method send, it's the same here. But try to use something that I show on the slides, which is to use, rather than a multiple message service like a map or a list, and use them. Probably the most adequate here will be the map, because you want to distinguish between the email and notification, since the email is used on the create user and the other one is on the update user. So, but let's see this working now here on the post. So again, let's create sending email, but now let's update. So the update will be the put here, these users, user one, and I'm providing here the data that I want new for this user. So I will send, and now you can see here that it's sending the notification. So we injected two different bins in our code, one for the email and the other for notification. Again, if you want an exercise for yourself, try to replace this with a map or a list, and you have the third option. Let's say fourth option, because we saw three options here. One is using the ifn parameters, which means that this name is important, but if which should be here, I will, where it is, settings, so you can do a summary of that. It was here, meaning that you can choose a model and you can put something like this. I don't like it, but it works if you want. I will remove it. I like to work I like to have control of all things, but probably there are some scenarios where this is useful. Okay, maybe you are migrating an application that is not in Spring Boot to Spring Boot, but it was already using somehow a dependency injection, and one way to start before adding all the notations to avoid problems. Where it's difficult to manage, you just put the name. You take the name of the parameters as the default, and then later you start to add qualifiers or primaries to your code. So that was the first way, a strategy to the disambiguities. The other one was using the primary, like this one. So this one will always be the default unless we explicitly say that it's a different one, and the way to explicitly say that it's a different one is to use qualifiers, and you can add them as parameters here at the auto wire and so on. So these are three strategies. There are others that I show, like lazy, optional, but they are not targeting ambiguity. There are other scenarios involved that I will explain in the future in more detail. So thanks for watching this video. I hope it was useful for you. But I think this is one of the most important videos when you are learning about beans in Spring Boot, after you understand how they work, the dependency injection, of course, because this is a common problem that when an application starts to grow, is how to manage all the beans and the dependencies between them, circular dependencies, requirements, and things like that. There are other problems like performance, things like that will be addressed in future videos, but these problems arise after these ones are resolved. So thank you for watching. Please subscribe, share with your friends, provide comments, videos that you'd like to see. I have in mind to do a queue with a lot of them. There are a lot to talk about Spring Boot, but if you are in need or requiring something that you would like to be explained for some reason, be free. I will try to do my best. So thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video.